Welcome to the Twist News. I'm Erika Grey. Today we're going to talk about a historic trade deal that the EU just signed with New Zealand. Now, this sounds boring, but it's absolutely not anything but. Right now, the U.S. deficit is at $32 trillion. And at $32 trillion, and with the BRIC nations and Russia making it a major effort to move away from the dollar and taking major steps, including many countries selling off U.S. bonds and treasuries to eliminate their dollar reserves, which also is weakening the dollar. In addition to all of this, we have the European Union, who is essentially hedging its economy through trade deals. But not only hedging its economy through trade deals, building its empire through them. The EU, compared to the US, which only has about 20 trade pacts, the EU has 78 in place, 10 in focus, and these 10 include the New Zealand deal. 25 being ratified, 5 being negotiated, and 23 on hold. This is like the members of the United Nations. I want you to think, this is what these numbers are beginning to look like, a portion of the globe. So think of the EU essentially becoming the trade hub of the globe. So let's take a peek right now at this New Zealand deal and why this is significant.
Now, after 4 years of negotiations, today we are signing the free trade agreement. It is an ambitious free trade agreement. It is a very well-balanced free trade agreement. I think it provides plenty of opportunities for our respective businesses. The European Union is already New Zealand's third biggest trade partner. And with this agreement, we should be able to increase trade between us by 30% and EU investment in New Zealand even by 80%. So this is excellent news for the businesses in New Zealand and in the European Union. As such, this deal is already very special, but it is also a trailblazer.
So I'm going to give you some facts. The deal will cut some $140 million a year in duties for EU companies in the first year of application. According to DW, why the EU-New Zealand free trade deal is important, DW states, tariffs will be eliminated on key EU exports. The New Zealand services market, including financial services, telecommunications, maritime transport, and delivery services, will be opened up further to EU players. New Zealand exporters will benefit from significantly improved access to the EU market, and some 91% of New Zealand's current trade into the EU will enter duty-free from day one. The New Zealand government said the country would gain up to $1 billion in exports to the 27-nation bloc every year. And within a decade, bilateral trade could grow up to 30% from the current $12.6 billion in goods and services, according to the EU Commission. Now, this deal is just one of many. Many of these are comprehensive in scope, from the EU-Canada agreement, EU-Australia agreement, this one's being negotiated, the EU-Japan agreement, which was negotiated and signed. Many of these have record-breaking provisions, completely opening up trade. So I want you to think of the European Union as a hedged empire, that these trade agreements are hedging its empire. So let's say the day comes when the dollar ceases to be the world's reserve and causes an upset in the markets. Well, guess what? Europe's market is hedged through all of these various agreements. And even though some of these or many of these markets will be affected, it will not affect Europe as much because Europe is hedged through the number of agreements that it has. Also, think of the EU as kind of this United Nations of trade agreements. I mean, this is what this is. It's a major trade hub for the world. And so you may say, oh, but European companies are not like US companies, and the European markets differ from the US markets. Well, guess what? The Capital Markets Union, the Banking Union, right now, the leaders within the European Central Bank and the European Security Mechanism are working very hard to boost the euro's reserve status and to tweak all of these areas, which is only going to boost their markets. In addition, there are many leading companies in the European Union. Now, not as profitable as the US tech companies, but there is a race, and Europe is pouring a lot of money into technology through its Horizons program. And New Zealand is joining that as well. The Horizon 2020 programs, they have a different name depending on the ending of the 7 or 8 year period from which the funding starts and ends, and then it takes on a new name. But basically, this is a serious endeavor spearheaded by the Commission to boost the EU's position as essentially a startup nation, to help it become a startup nation and take the lead. In addition, its Green Deal is ahead of the United States by about 2 years. It will remain there because of when it started its legislation. And that also is written to boost the economy of the European Union and also boost companies that are coming out with these various products. And some of the Horizon companies or some of the Horizon initiatives are also in the area to boost the Green Deal or the Green Deal's aims for various companies as well. So this needs to be told to you and pointed out because you don't have a lot of focus on the European Union empire, and it is a forming and growing empire. Meanwhile, the US is declining. The United States dollar, we are just in a huge deficit. There's many taking Pact shots at the dollar now. And so it's just a matter of time before there's going to be a tectonic shift. But already there is a shift taking place within the European Union with these trade pacts and the approach it is taking in building its empire. Also, concerning the European market versus the US market, many of the stocks on the US market are overpriced. European companies' stocks are priced in much lower. So there's much more room for growth of those stocks in that market versus the United States, which is in bubble status. So, wanted to highlight this New Zealand deal because this is another record-breaking deal that the EU has signed, and most media probably gives it a little blip on the screen, but this is major bananas, major news, because it's adding to a picture now of this empire and how strong this empire is going to, or is on the road to becoming, will become by virtue of these trade pacts. And it's becoming such a trade giant that it's has already begun to rewrite the rules for the world in areas such as AI, digital services, the battery directive, and there's more. And also the reciprocity clause that not only did Emmanuel Macron mention, but I just tuned into a speech, and Charles Michel, who is the president of the council, also mentioned the reciprocity, meaning that nations that trade with Europe are going to have to adopt some of its laws. And guess what? Those laws are not going to necessarily have to do with trade. So we have an age of empires that the world has entered. It's becoming more obvious and solidified, especially since the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which is dividing the globe. And the empires now are out for themselves. They're trying to work out deals with other empires, or the empires that they're friendly with, to boost their own GDP, boost their own policy, their strength in numbers. But it's definitely the empires getting together against other empires. And we see Europe now, just by virtue of its trade pacts, becoming something that's never before been seen on the world stage, but literally a trade hub for the world. And the United States, with all of our trade, with the strength of all of U.S. companies, only has about 20 different trade pacts, maybe 22 or 3, something like that, pales in comparison to the number that the EU has. Now, the US has had the strength of its companies, powerhouse companies, unbelievably prosperous, but the EU is fast in a race so that they can achieve that same status, or their companies can achieve the same status. So imagine companies within the EU that can parallel now and mirror those companies in the US in time. And as the euro works or moves towards more reserve currency status, and the dollar ceases, it's almost a no-brainer that Europe is going to be in the lead over the United States. And that's where this is going. And you can see the writing on the wall that this is what's going to take place, because the US now is in a major crisis. Not only do we have a $32 trillion deficit, we have a homeless crisis. We also have a crisis with mentally ill on the streets in major cities like New York City, creating havoc. And there's major issues because the United States has given away so much money, but not taken care of its own country. And right now we're giving lots of money away. We just print it and give it away, but we're not helping our own. So the country is deteriorating. The dollar is declining. And in the meanwhile, other empires now are on the world stage, taking a position that weren't there before, such as India, the African Union. Now, granted, the African Union is not as strong, but it's going to be there at some point. It's working towards that. And you also have India that has been year after year building its economy and has made some great strides. And you also have these BRIC nations that have joined together as a force. So the world order is a very different world order than what it was even 5 years ago. And it's as Guy Verhofstadt, former Belgian prime minister, powerhouse within the EU architecture, powerhouse politician, stated in 2009 that the world would enter an age of empires. And what we're going to see is those empires that will take the lead. So that's why this trade deal with New Zealand, which may seem like a blip on your computer screen and boring news and let's ignore it and who cares, that's why it matters. I hope you found this informative. Stay tuned for more. Check out my Amazon store or the Amazon store where the experts who come on, their books are featured. Check out the recommended channels also of our guests and stay tuned for more.